Okay, here's the ending. Charlotte rode home one evening, tired and dusty. She was very familiar with every shadow of her property, but in the waning light, she could tell that something was wrong. She stared hard in the dim light with her good eye to figure out what it was. In the front pasture, there was something different. Something wooden, a box? Who would have left a wood box in her front pasture? After she first moved in, she had found a burlap sack tossed down the road, and it was a litter of kittens that someone had abandoned. She took them in and nursed them all, and now they ran all over her orchard. Had someone tried to leave another poor animal on her property, this time in a wooden box? As she rode closer, she realized that it wasn't a wooden box at all, but a sign. Someone had pounded a wooden sign in her front pasture and had painted some words on the front. Puzzled, she walked her horse through the tall pasture grass so she could get a look. Her heart leaped at the sight. She turned the horse and galloped toward the cabin. Painted on the sign were the words, "Private property." Who do you think that is? Sitting on her front porch, playing with an armful of kittens, was a lanky, broad-shouldered, red-haired man with the biggest ears Charlotte had ever seen. "Hayward!" She tied her horse and bounded up the porch, and she hugged him long and hard. "Hey, you're taller than me and twice as strong. I don't think I can stand it," said Charlotte. "It's about time I could be better at you than you at something," he said, laughing. They studied each other. Hay had never seen Charlotte's eye patch before, and she was suddenly embarrassed. I'm plumb blind in that eye," she said. "You don't look much different," said Hay, "but boy, would you scare William to death." They both laughed, and memories of the orphanage flooded over Charlotte. When Hay reached for a one-array kitten, Charlotte noticed a thin leather tied around his wrist. "You still got the leather bracelet," she said, and held out her arm to compare his. Both leather bands were soft and rolled from years of wear. "Remember that day, Charlotte?" "As well as you," she said. They hugged again. So many years had passed between them. They were older, but yet everything about him seemed familiar. "I missed you, Charlotte." "Me too, Hay." Charlotte had been so hungry to see him that all she could do was stare. She started to reach up and ruffle his hair, but when she hesitated, an awkward silence came over them. He finally said, "Well, I made it to California." And when she remembered her manners, she said, "Sit down and tell me what you've been doing." "Well, after my folks moved to Missouri, I rode for Pony Express, but that didn't last long, about a year and a half. The Transcontinental Telegraph and the railroad took its place right after. After that, I needed work, so I moved cattle for a while, and I've been stock tendering some." He grinned. "But I've been saving my money for California." Charlotte smiled. It was the same old Hay, chattering away, as eager as ever to tell her everything. She relaxed. Nothing had changed. "Now my folks want to move west, so when I got the chance to ride out with a wagon train, I knew I had to come to learn the roads and to see you. That's where I've been all these months, on the wagon train. I saved every one of your letters. I can't really believe it's you, Charlotte." "I know it's hard to believe, but I'm the same old Charlotte, fighting and scrapping my way." "You still driving?" he asked. "Some. I aim to make my property the way station, change the teams when they come through. I'll take care of the horses and buy a few of my own with the money I bring in. Ebenezer's coming for a visit, and I'm going to do my best to get him to stay. For all my traveling around, I didn't think I'd ever want to stay put, but for some reason, I'm as contented as my new mare." "You got a new mare? Will she foal in the spring?" he asked. "Yep," said Charlotte. He shook his head and grinned. "I guess we're as far away from the orphanage as we'll ever get." "What do you hear about the orphanage?" "Well, I saw some of the boys now and then. Last I heard, Mill Shark's still there, but Mrs. Boyle's gone. I heard William got adopted the year after me by an elderly couple who needed someone to work their farm. I guess the man loved his animals, and William beat his prize mare, so they sent him back. First boy in years that got unadopted. Don't that figure? You hear about Vern, that he passed on?" "No," said Charlotte quietly. "I didn't know, but for some reason I suspected. He was getting on in years when we were there. I won't ever be forgetting him for all he done for me." Charlotte got teary-eyed and didn't even try to hide it. She pulled out her handkerchief and wiped her eyes. Hayward looked toward the cabin. "You done good, Charlotte." You done real good. Chapter 10. Hayward stayed for a month of Sundays, and Charlotte couldn't bear thinking about him leaving again. The morning he left, she said, "Hey, you can stock tender for me as long as you like." "Charlotte, I'm beginning to think you like having me around," he teased. "I never thought I'd see the day, but first, I got work to finish in Missouri, and then I got to help my folks move out here." He hesitated and then said, "Charlotte, come with me." Charlotte looked out the window as if she hadn't heard him. "It'll take me over a year, Charlotte. You could get someone to watch the place, and then Ebenezer could take over till we got back. Won't you come?" She turned and looked at him. "I can't. I don't want to leave. I worked my whole life for this. I belong here. I want to build up my horse stock, and I got apples to pick and things I got to do. Besides, there's been something I've been thinking about for some time that I feel strongly about." She knew she could tell Hay anything, but she wasn't sure how he would react to this. "I registered to vote in Santa Cruz County. The election's in a few days, and I don't want to miss it." Hayward stared at her and shook his head. "Charlotte, you'll be going against the law." "Hey, I know more about who to vote for than most. Women are citizens of this country just like you. They work hard and make decisions sound as any man." "There's a lot of folks out there who don't agree." "There's a lot of men who don't agree," said Charlotte. Hayward grinned at her. "I ain't one of them," he said. "I just don't understand what you'll be proving if no one knows you're a woman." "I guess I'm proving that here I am, a member of this county that most folks respect. Most of them ask me who I'm voting for. And the only reason I can walk in and vote is because they think I'm a man. Sooner or later, they'll all know I was a woman and my point will be made." "So someday you're going to let people know you're a lady?" he asked. "Maybe. But whether I let them know or not, I'll be wearing these same clothes and tending my horses and running this ranch, same as always." He considered what she said and shook his head. "You know you're mine, Charlotte, and that's fine by me. You know how I feel about you." "I know." He gave her a big hug and acted like he was never going to let go, and then he got on his horse and rode down the lane past the corral. Charlotte stood on the porch and watched him ride away. He stopped halfway down the road and waved his hat. Charlotte waved back. He put his hat back on and cupped his hands around his mouth. "I'll be back," he hollered. "I know," Charlotte whispered to herself. It was sprinkling when Charlotte rode into town that November afternoon, but a little rain wouldn't stop her. She hoped it wouldn't stop other folks from getting out and doing what they had to do either. Luckily, by the time she got to town, the sun had come out. She hitched the Mustang and walked down the street and nodded to the people walking by. A big sign in the window of the hotel said, "Polls." Some of the ladies in town went about their errands and didn't seem to give a second thought to the long line of men in front of the hotel. Others gathered out front in twos and threes, waiting for their menfolk, and acted like there was nothing special about going inside. Charlotte wondered if they really didn't care, or if they were going about playing their roles like she was playing hers. One man came up and clapped her on the back. "Glad to see you, Charlie," he said. Another man said, "Pretty exciting day, ain't it, Charlie?" Charlotte didn't say much. She shook hands all around and got in line with the men. She listened to their banter and joke around her. "Heard Wyoming's going to give women the right to vote. I thought I'd heard everything. What's this country coming to?" "What do you think, Charlie?" Charlotte said, "I don't think it hurts nothing. I guess they know their minds as well as we do." "Don't hurt nothing. Them women fighting for this is just plain crazy, stirring up trouble all over. They'll be the ruination of this country. I told my wife that she would never be voting as long as she's married to me, no matter what the law says. What does she know about politics?" Several other men added their opinions, and the line inched up the hotel steps. A little boy ran up, found his father in line, and tugged on his hand. "Papa, Papa, the Taylor boy said Sarah and I can't play ball because I'm little and she's a girl, and she's fighting him in the street, and he's twice as big as her. Hurry, Papa." Father shook his head. We told her about fighting. When's that girl gonna learn?" The men chuckled, and the father and the little boy left. The line moved closer to the desk. Charlotte got to the front and signed the book. The registrar handed her a ballot, and she studied the names. Horatio Seymour or Ulysses S. Grant, the conservative Democrat or the much talked about Republican. She had listened to the talk, and she had heard people debate the people's debates. She had heard good things and bad things about both men, but she knew her own mind and what she thought was right. You know who you're voting for, Charlie? Asked the man next to her. Yes, I do, said Charlotte. Old Jake couldn't make it today because he's ailing. Felt real bad about not coming, but I told him one vote won't make no difference. Charlotte nodded to the man. Would her one vote make a difference? Why was she doing this? Someday when people found out, would they just think she'd been crazy too? Or would they wonder if she'd had good reason? Yes, she told herself, she had good reason. This was something she could do for that woman who'd stood up in front of all those laughing men and passed out handbills on the saloon steps. Something for those women out front who were pretending they didn't mind that they couldn't vote. For Vern, who hadn't been allowed to speak up or should have been able to. For the little girl outside who was already standing up for herself. She smiled. And for me, she thought, because I'm as qualified as the next man. She marked her choice for President of the United States. She turned in her ballot, faced the crowd of men still waiting in line, and tipped her hat. Gentlemen, she said, may the best man win. And then she walked out of the hotel, got on her horse, and rode home. In the end, Ebenezer arrived in the spring, just before the foal. He surveyed the property and grumbled about all the things that should be done. The pasture fence needed mending and the chickens needed a new coop. Margaret needed help selling the eggs in town. Charlotte was tickled because she figured all his belly aching meant that he'd come to stay. And the foal, well, it came in the middle of the night, in the middle of a thunderstorm. It gave Charlotte fits and worries because it was breech, trying to come out the wrong way. She coaxed it as best she knew, but when she was afraid they'd both be lost, she woke up Ebenezer. The two sat up all night, soothing the mother horse, who was as frightened by the thunder as she was by the birthing. While Ebenezer tried to deliver the foal, Charlotte paced like an expectant father. Her mind was on the night she sat up with Freedom, and she was remembering Vern. If he were here, he'd be telling her to settle down, that Ebenezer knew what he was doing. Vern had been right about so many things. But Charlotte needn't have worried. By the time the rooster crowed, a wet, folded-up bundle of legs was delivered. A filly. The baby horse barely stood on her wobbly legs when Ebenezer said, "There's another one coming! Twins!" And in a few frantic minutes, a colt stood next to his sister. "What are you going to name them?" asked Ebenezer. "You should call them Worry and Trouble for the night they gave us." And then he laughed. But Charlotte got quiet and serious-like. "Naming is something important," she said, "and a name should stand for something. A horse's name should be fitting for a fine animal." She watched the foals and didn't say anything. The mare licked the colt and the filly started nursing. And after she'd considered them for some time, Charlotte crossed her arms and nodded her head with a knowing smile. It had come to her. "Well, you going to keep it to yourself?" said Ebenezer. Charlotte was right proud to explain her reasoning behind it all. And when she was finished, Ebenezer had to agree. They were fine names. Important names that stood for something, that were fitting for fine animals. She named the colt Vern's Thunder, and she named the filly Freedom.